My guest today is Sarah King. She's the Sustainability Director for Skanska USA Commercial Development. Now, we know Skanska from the construction side, a big, huge contractor here in the United States and a global contractor based in Sweden, but they also have a commercial development operation, and Sarah is the Sustainability Director there. We're going to be talking about embodied carbon today, and why embodied carbon is an important concern to building owners like Skanska USA Commercial Development. So Sarah, tell us briefly, what is embodied carbon in building materials, and why are you so concerned about it?
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. So Skanska obviously is a global real estate development and construction company with a very long-standing commitment to sustainability. And so we've got an ambitious climate target to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. And that's not just in our own operations, but also in our value chains. So the use of all the projects that we sell, and then also all those construction materials that we buy. And we just yesterday announced that we've tightened our interim target. So our new 2030 target is a 70% reduction from a 2030 baseline. So that was previously 50%, but we just increased our ambition, and that was just announced yesterday. So
wow, pretty ambitious.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
Good luck.
Yeah, so it's a challenging target, but I think that that's obviously what the world and what the industry needs right now is companies really stepping up and challenging themselves to really do this. So decarbonization is a big part of it. And then operational carbon, we've been thinking about for a long time, all the energy efficiency things we're doing for the buildings that we construct. And then embodied carbon is all that energy that's used to produce, to mine, to manufacture, and to transport the construction materials that we use to build a building. So concrete and steel are really big energy intensive industries in terms of the material production. And so as a building owner and a developer, we want to really think about how we can decarbonize both ends of our value chain.
Mm-hmm. Your company was involved in the creation of something called the EC3 tool, which is the, help me out here, it's the Embodied Carbon in Construction Calculator.
You got it.
EC3 tool, okay.
Yeah.
You worked with Microsoft. Your colleague Sarah Smedley was heavily involved in that, I believe.
Yep,
you worked with Microsoft, you worked with Autodesk and University of Washington Carbon Leadership Forum and many other. We'll put a list up of the folks who participated in that. But tell us about this tool, and you're using it and you're promoting it. Why is this of benefit to building owners in particular and their project teams?
Yep, absolutely. So basically, the EC3 tool just is a tool that gives us the information that we need to make informed decisions when we're procuring construction materials. And so basically what the EC3 tool does is collect environmental product declarations from all sorts of material manufacturers that relate to the building and construction industry. And an EPD, an environmental product declaration, is basically kind of like a nutrition label for that material. And so it will tell you how much carbon was emitted, how much energy was used, how much water, how much waste in the manufacture of that material. And what the transparency of the EC3 tool does is bring all these EPDs together in this library and makes it usable and gives us the tools that we need to understand the difference between supplier A, B, and C in our market when we're going out and buying rebar. Because what we found is that even in a local market, you can have very different carbon intensity of that individual material just based on that manufacturer's facilities and their own energy efficiency practices, how they're powering their plants and that type of thing. So it basically gives us as a developer the tools that we need and the transparency and the data to make informed decisions and tell the market what we want and be that kind of voice of demand for lower carbon products.
Yeah. Do you actually tell suppliers, we can't use you? You don't have an EPD, or your EPD is not as strong as your competitor here? I mean, do you do that on an active basis?
Well, so, what we're doing is trying to send out the message that we want these EPDs and give we try to do this early enough in our process where we're giving the manufacturers the opportunity to, and the education, because a lot of these manufacturers EPDs might not have crossed their radar yet, but
Yeah.
but it's certainly coming. And so different markets are in different places across the United States. And so
which market, which building, large groups of building materials? I think the ones you're concerned about, you mentioned concrete and cement, steel, gypsum's another important area.
Yep.
Who's doing, shall we say, the best job on their EPDs and working with you in this way? What industry would you say is most progressive, if you will?
I think that there's transformation happening in all of the industries. I think if you look nationally in the US, I think that there's more plant level EPDs for steel right now than there are for concrete, if just to kind of take a national average. But I do think that the concrete and ready mix firms are really stepping up quickly. And so I think that they're feeling the demand. And I think that's kind of like the nice cyclical thing that's happening here, is that with the transparency and the information, we can then voice our demand in a way that the market hears it. And so, as a developer, we're active in 5 US markets. So Seattle, Los Angeles, Houston, Boston, and DC. So those are the different markets that we're in. In some of those markets, the manufacturers, the concrete manufacturers and rebar manufacturers are already producing the plant level EPDs, and we can sort of move right towards, selecting them, incorporating carbon alongside price and schedule in our procurement process.
Right.
In others, we're doing more of the market education. And so in places like Houston, we've started construction recently on an office tower in downtown Houston. And so we really wanted to use the EC3 tool there. And we sent out letters to the ready mix manufacturers in the area ahead of time and just said, here's why we care about embodied carbon. Here's what an EPD is. Here's how you as a manufacturer could produce it. And here's how we're going to use that in our procurement process. And so it's not so much, it's what we're trying to do is more of a carrot than a stick. But then what we do is certainly then just incorporate that alongside the things that will always matter for us in terms of the price and the schedule and the performance. And bring carbon in.
Let's make sure the building stands up at the end of the job.
Yeah, for sure.
But I've heard, talking to manufacturers, I know that producing an EPD is pretty prodigious effort. So you're doing a lot of education where it's needed, places where markets where there is strong environmental and EPD based knowledge base, if you will. You're good with that, but is there a lag time between when you go out into a market and say, here's what we want from ready mix, from steel, from gypsum, from other wood and other materials? Is there a lag there between when you start educating and when the manufacturers start responding?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a little bit of a lag, but honestly, I think like for again, that project in Houston that I'm thinking of, we sent the message out, and then during the bid and procurement process, there was dialogue with those bidders, and one of them did step up. So we'll have our first, plant-specific concrete EPD in the Houston market, which for us is a huge milestone. And so, and we think what we see is that as you have one manufacturer who commits to it, the burden is really, like for a lot of things, it's the first one that you do that's the hardest. And then a lot of times, once you've produced one EPD for your plant, it really is just a click of a button to produce for any mix that somebody would want.
What kind of results? What kind of results are you getting, Sarah, on your better projects? What kind of embodied carbon reduction are you getting for these?
Yeah. So at another project that we're doing, we've started construction on it just this year. It's called The 8 in Bellevue, Washington. So it's in greater Seattle market. We really took, so we're a core and shell developer, and we really took a focus on that structure. So what do we control most of all? And where's the biggest impact? So it was that concrete and rebar and structural steel for this project. And so we ahead of time worked with our structural engineer to put in some performance-based specs into the into the big packet that goes out to all the manufacturers with the information about what we're looking to buy and what the structural performance integrity needs to be. And so we put some carbon intensity performance targets in there, went out to the market, and then with just looking at concrete and rebar, we were able to reduce about 50% of the embodied carbon.
Wow.
Which is really significant. And then if you kind of include all the different core and shell material scopes in that, it amounts to about a 30% reduction overall in kind of the whole core and shell delivery.
Yeah.
So it's a really meaningful chunk of the emissions.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea is, as I understand it, is you're trying to keep the carbon out before the building even starts. I mean,
Exactly.
is that oversimplifying it? I mean, but that's kind of the idea, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think about it like with the operational efficiency of a building, you've got the whole lifetime of the building. Yes, your decisions at day one matter, of what systems you put in place, but you can retrofit, and it's you can make energy efficiency improvements over time as new things come out, and you can make behavior shifts to improve your operational energy efficiency. But on the embodied carbon side, you just get that one bite at the apple when you go out and you decide which materials you're making the building out of. So that's the first kind of thing. And then once you decide what you're making the building out of, then when you go and buy those materials from those manufacturers and suppliers.
What's the next step in this? I've heard something about whole building life cycle analysis or life cycle studies as a kind of a next step in this. What are your thoughts on that? Is Skanska USA Commercial Development looking into that as well, or is that part of this program?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we do whole building LCAs on a number of our projects. And so that really helps inform, that early stage, is it going to be a steel and concrete building? Are you going to be incorporating some timber into it? Kind of, it helps you make those big picture decisions. And then also helps you optimize kind of the sizing of your floor pours and all the different kind of, how can you optimize those individual mixes? And there's so many different concrete mixes that go into a high-rise office tower. And so how are you thoughtfully coming at that with the performance that you need from each material? Whole building LCAs, I think, is a really complementary tool with the EC3 tool, because it kind of helps give you that big picture of your building. And then the EC3 tool really helps you go out and be an informed buyer and a customer.
Are there any other projects that you've done where you feel you've really learned something, or something valuable and new has happened as a result of your efforts on embodied carbon? Any tricks of the trade that you could pass along to other developers and to their project teams?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think first is just like the aha of how much, in terms of the life cycle carbon emissions of a building, that especially as we're making our buildings more energy efficient, the operational side of that building, even if you look out over 30, sometimes up to 50 years, it is how long of an operations of that building it takes for it to equal that embodied carbon that's in there on day one. So I think just the sort of the relative scale and importance of embodied carbon in a building's life cycle emissions, I think, is a major takeaway. And I think that's something that we're trying to translate into. So with each project, I'll try to translate what is that reduction in embodied carbon and how many years of that building does that amount to? And often it's, 10, it could be more years of operating that building is how much we were able to kind of reduce just by making some smart decisions during our procurement process.
And price. Is it tell us about, the impact on the budget?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another great story with embodied carbon, is that because we're in the early days, there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit. And I think the other piece of it is, so we've been like at the office tower in Bellevue that I mentioned, the 50% reduction from concrete and rebar, it was really at no additional cost. It was just by looking at the data, understanding the carbon performance of the different suppliers, and then taking that into consideration when we awarded the bid. Yeah. And so
who was your structural team on that?
Structural MKA was the structural engineer there.
Yeah.
And they're absolutely a leader in this area.
They do great work. you know, I mean, this is a huge issue because, as I understand it, embodied carbon worldwide, globally, is like 11% of all greenhouse gases. So, I mean, if we can do 50% there, we're really helping out with the 1.5 degree to 2 degree goals that we have here, you know, globally. Any other, you know, final advice to others? I mean, are manufacturers really responding fast enough, do you think, Sarah? What could manufacturers be doing? How do we give them a swift kick to get them going on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's different in each market, but I think people are really hearing this demand. And I think there's also things like Skanska Commercial Development is part of this Owners Can group, the Owners Carbon Action Network, which is kind of a sister organization to Materials Can, the Materials Carbon Action Network. And so I think what we're seeing that's really positive is owners coming together. And so we have, you know, frequent, maybe monthly or bi-monthly calls where we're coming together to share information about how we're writing those specs, how we're engaging with suppliers, and kind of the recognition that one developer in DC isn't going to move the market, but if the suppliers start hearing from a number of different big owners and entities that are making procurement decisions, that sends the signal a lot faster. So I think we're seeing some really positive collaboration on the owner side of figuring out how to send that signal even faster to the manufacturers, which I think makes a really big difference.
Do you think your buildings from Skanska USA Commercial Development are going to be more marketable as a result of what you're doing?
I hope so. I mean, I think that we're seeing so many people are getting savvier and more knowledgeable about carbon and how, you know, we're at this moment in time where it's such a critical juncture and where we really need to decarbonize, and the built environment is one of those sectors that that is more complicated than some just because of how dispersed it is. So I do hope that tenants will be interested in this. And I think we're really trying to find embodied carbon, as we've talked about, isn't the most simple topic to explain. And it's absolutely invisible. Like when you're in a low in embodied carbon building, you don't know it. And so we need to tell the story. And so I think
do you put signage up? I mean, do you publicize it within the building, or do you publicize it during the marketing? That you've done this?
Yeah, we've started to do that in multiple markets, and so I think it's nice. Yeah, I think there
are going to be progressive tenants who are going to say, hey, you know, I mean, obviously there are nonprofits and foundations and others that like this kind of thing, but I think it's going to stretch over into, you know, more of the, you know, straightforward commercial side and say, yeah, we want to be, you know, if it doesn't cost us anymore, why shouldn't we be in a nice greener building than others? So yeah, all right.
Absolutely.
Well. Any final thoughts that we can give out to our audience, and then I think we'll wrap it up.
You know, I think the more the merrier. So I think the more demand that's coming from contractors, from developers, architects, engineers, tenants, I think just that there's a lot of interesting collaboration happening in this space right now. And so I think if you're just starting your journey on embodied carbon, it's okay to start small, and that there's lots of people who are a little bit further along on the journey who would be more than happy to collaborate and help out.
Great. All right. Well, we've had a very interesting discussion of what could be a very dull topic, but it's actually very exciting, on embodied carbon, with Sarah King, who's the Sustainability Director at Skanska USA Commercial Development. Sarah, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.